The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together.
Well, they didn't.
Very serious.
The referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
From Russia with love.
Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the Scottish Independence Podcast, where I'm delighted to say that our guest is Vladimir Putin. No, it isn't. Our guest this time was MSP Jean Urquhart. We had a great conversation, so I won't waste any time, and we'll go straight to it and have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Jean, how's it going?
Hello, Michael. It's going really well, very well.
Everyone's very focused on the now at the moment, what with the independence referendum coming up. Obviously that's quite understandable, but you've been involved in the independence movement for a long time, and it's an interesting area because on these podcasts we've not really gone into the longer term history of it. And could you tell me how you first sort of got involved with it and how the situation was when Scottish independence first became an important issue for you?
Yeah, well, I can. Actually, it started for me with a visit to the Soviet Union. And I think, without going into lots of details, but the realization in some ways of how we had been misled by our government and a slow realization of the kind of propaganda that we're fed, and the fact that I was pretty ignorant about Scotland's history in spite of a so-called terrific education system, which I then began to question, and also just our sense of, I guess, national identity, the fact that we had been a country and that 300 years isn't a very long time, and it wasn't even 300 years then, it was the end of the 80s. And again, just nobody ever, I think, really is convinced by a party political leaflet through the door, but by starting to talk to one or two other people that I knew had been involved with the SNP for a while. And it was all just coming together in my mind. And it was nothing to do with economics, actually, at that time, that it was the right thing to do. And I joined the party. And just to talk about how the kind of, everybody recognizes the rapid growth of the party in the period that I was there. The very first conference I went to, which I think would have been in the early 90s, so it's really not that long ago, I helped put out the chairs for the conference. To the last conference I was at with kind of 2,200 people, something. So I think, like so many things, but I feel I was in the party at a very interesting time.
Yeah, it's often portrayed that 20, 30 years ago and beyond, Second World War time and even further back, that the support for independence was just basically a few sort of fringe lunatics. But I've never been convinced by that narrative. There was always support within the Labour movement for home rulers and different things. Through the years, do you recognise that narrative that you hear about this? It was just a few fringe people, or do you feel that popular support has always been bigger than is portrayed?
I think that's true, and there's two bits of evidence to that. A few fringe lunatics, if you look at the people who started the party in 1928, the group that eventually became the SNP in the 30s, I was fortunate enough as a candidate in Caithness to meet with a woman called Pearl Cook, who was born in 1900, and I met her on her 99th birthday. And I was slightly dreading it because I'm not great with older people she was in hospital, and I kind of imagined somebody who, was just frail and ill. And I got there to find this feisty 99-year-old who was only in hospital because she had slipped on the landing of her flat, which was 4 flights of stairs up with no lift, and lived independently. And she was the secretary, as you would imagine, being a woman, of that group in 1928 as a 28-year-old. And I was stunned, actually, by a huge intellect that she had and her interest in Scotland. And if I hadn't been convinced before then. And the other thing is that I think they were remarkably, they were maybe the kind of Scots intelligentsia, if you like. So they were seriously thinking people. And the movement since then, I think, has attracted of course, there's always been the kind of, the fringe, as there is anywhere, people, and that's evidenced today too by kind of daft blogging and tweets and whatever, by people who are extreme, but every country has them, and every party has them, so we're not unique. And I notice that the Better Together are calling for Alex Salmond to call a halt to the madness that's being put on the social media, but they don't actually recognise, they're not calling for people on their side to do the same. So I think we have to recognise that there are always people that will come from left field with kind of daft, or racist remarks and so on, which is unacceptable to the majority of people in Scotland. And I think we have to have faith in the broad church that, as you rightly say, the Liberals with their home rule policy, which they dropped, I think, sometime in the 30s maybe, and Labour Party members as well. So it's a difficult thing. I mean, one of the things that was very important to me in joining the SNP was their attitude to NATO and nuclear weapons, because I'd been involved in that movement for a long time. And I think the realisation that if we were ever going to see Trident out of the Clyde, then it needed to be political and it wouldn't just be the kind of mass movement.
So that led to your withdrawal from the SNP at a certain point. But then you must have been quite pleased that CND are supporting Indy for the same reasons that you've suggested as well.
Well, I am, yes. And I have to say the Yes movement was easy to slip into. So that made it a bit easier to leave the SNP. The fact that there was this growing support, which was not part of the party. And it's great to be part of that. The radical independence movement is growing too, and that's really exciting because it's producing different ideas and different political philosophy to the one that's in the white paper. I did leave the party, and I think what's really interesting is that the vote was so close, of course, at conference, that clearly there's a lot of people in the party who are like-minded and have decided to stay and fight, and that's admirable. But as far as I was concerned, I mean, I did campaign against NATO exercises in Cape Wrath, which is near the part of Scotland where I live, and in the Western Isles. And so for me to come home and say, do you know, it's okay, was really, I couldn't do it. Hard as it was to leave the party, it was easier to do that than face people and feel that I had somehow just changed my own view on NATO, which I have not.
It's always nice to see an elected representative stand up for principles. There's often a lack of it. But on a wider point about the kind of democracy that we have, how do you find functioning in the Parliament as an independent instead of with the backing of a party? Do you find it harder or easier, or is it a mix of both?
Well, there are certain areas that you'll know that John Finney also resigned from the party, and we have joined forces. We haven't joined political philosophy, but we've joined forces with the two members of the Green Party, Alison Johnson and Patrick Harvey, and Margot MacDonald, of course, has been that lone independent for the first year and a half. So we're a group of 5, and that means that John represents us on the Bureau. We are marginalised on the D'Hondt system in terms of getting speaking time. We tend to be invited to speak possibly for a minute less than everybody else at the very end of debates. So that's a bit that can be frustrating sometimes. But we're actually making our case for a bit more democracy in the Parliament for independence. And actually, I think that when we have independence after the successful yes vote, Parliament will change, of course, and I think we'll see a rise in different people coming forward. I hope maybe even a number of independents standing, because it makes the debate, it makes the vote and the whole discussion and the place of the Parliament much more exciting and interesting, I think, for the people in Scotland.
Do you think the Parliament's in quite a bad way at the moment? You know, I'm sort of political anorak, so I even watch things like First Minister's questions, but usually the only decent thing that comes is a backbencher's question sort of 5 minutes before the end instead of the slagging match that goes on before it.
I know. And the presiding officer, I think, has been aware of that too, that the leaders of the opposition parties tend to make speeches before they get to a question, and there is this kind of it's the pantomime of Parliament rather than, and sadly, of course, it's the one time when the chamber is full of people, and it can be quite embarrassing. It's also the time that we tend to have visitors from other countries and so on. I think people that do know that, though, we're not daft. And I'm amazed at the number of people who watch some of the parliamentary committees, taking evidence and so on. I'm sure even with people who voted no in 97 for a parliament in Scotland would now take to the streets with a banner to keep it. I mean, there's thousands of people come through here every week, and more school visits, a growing interest in politics in Scotland, and outrage at some of the decisions that are taken or the policies that are passed, or great support and feel good. And I think that Scotland has responded well to its parliament.
Do you think also this effect is increasing because of the independence referendum? More people are getting involved, more people want to know about the issues. Win or lose in the referendum, do you think it's having a good kind of knock-on effect?
I do, because I think it's made people pay more attention to the parliament that they have. I think it's made people pay more attention to the reserved matters, the kind of frustration of the restrictive powers that we have. I also think, and I wish that Scotland, generally everybody in Scotland, realised how much interest there is from abroad. You know, I think that there's swathes of Europeans batting for us to do this. And I think if they knew the kind of support they've got, so far it's become, sadly, a battle between England and Scotland, really, or Westminster and Holyrood. And I don't believe for a minute that all the horror stories of Scotland declaring independence. In fact, do you know, I actually think it's probably less momentous than we're making it out to be. I hate the phrase the first time in 300 years, because 300 years ago we didn't have an opportunity to vote one way or another. So it is actually the first time that we'll be voting for independence. And the other thing is to put the Union in context. It is only 300 years ago. We had a tapestry exhibition in the lobby, the public lobby of the Parliament here, which was 420 million years of Scottish history. And it kind of put in context that 300 years. People live to be 100. It's only three lifetimes ago. It was a political union then, and it's found wanting. So why would we not wish to change that? And I simply don't accept the point I was going to make to you, that somehow there will be great hostility if the people of Scotland vote yes, because it will be in everybody's interest. We're still joined in the landmass with England and Wales, and of course there will have to be masses of cooperation with our neighbours, and why would they not be? But I think Scotland will grow up too. I mean, I think there's lots of things wrong with Scotland, but, you know, blaming Westminster for everything isn't very attractive, and we'll have to stop doing that.
There's quite a common point that it's the only opportunity, independence is the only opportunity for a grown-up relationship between Scotland and England.
Well, I think that's right. I'm sure there was a poll recently that showed that most people in England would support independence for Scotland, and some of that will come from the extreme subsidy junkie, get rid of them, we're better off without them attitude. And others are very grown up about it and saying, well, you know, it may actually, of course it will change the face of British politics. And they're never going to do it, but it would just be fantastic if some of the Westminster politicians could start thinking about how these three nation states would work together.
So is Vladimir Putin going to bully you into voting no?
I know, that's extraordinary, isn't it? Well, I just think that shows the length that they will go to maintain the great British state. And it's a kid on, you know, it's pretendy. I mean, I was listening on the radio this morning, and I should know this because of my interest in armaments, but Britain is the fourth highest spender of military hardware. You know, that's absolutely shocking for a country of our size. It's pretending that, you know, we're with big bombs we can play this important role. And I think that they see losing 5 million people in Scotland as somehow it's going to take away their manhood or something.
Have you not heard the kind of narrative that Jack Straw came out with it a long time ago, and it's repeated from time to time? They're worried about this idea of, you know, it would be a diminishing of their power, they would lose their seat on the UN Security Council. How real do you think that kind of concern of theirs is? Personally, I think it's quite a good idea, but...
I just think it takes us into the 21st century and facing a bit of realism about our nation, you know. And I think our first call has to be the people who live here, and we don't do that. There's inequalities all over the place. The wealth is all in London and the home counties, and the wealth is generated across the other parts of